Welcome to the FunkMMA Strength and Conditioning Podcast, hosted by Funk Roberts, former professional athlete, certified MMA conditioning coach, and master of metabolic training. Funk is one of the leading conditioning coaches in the martial arts industry today and has a following of over 500,000 combat athletes around the world. His workouts and training principles have been used by many professional fighters, including fighters in the UFC, Bellator, and ONE FC, as well as World Muay Thai champions, Glory Kickboxers, and ADCC BJJ champions. Join me in welcoming your host, Funk Roberts.
What's up, people? What's up, people? It's the Funkster here with my boy Andy T. What's up, Andy?
Hey, how's it going? You started that one off a little different.
I did because the We Are Live thing is going to happen after the this podcast starts. Welcome to podcast episode number 15, which is with Jeff Novitzky, the man, the myth, the legend. He is a legend, and we're pretty excited to have Jeff on the podcast. If you guys don't know who Jeff Novitzky is, he is known for his work in bringing down Lance Armstrong, Balco, Barry Bonds, Marion Jones. Pretty much, he is the Victor Conte. He is the drug. What would you call him? Like,
I would call him drug cop dude.
Yeah, amazing. So no, Jeff, you know, his line of work and regarding what he's done to bring down people who are cheating in sports is incredible. And so today we had him on, and it was amazing. You know, not only that, I know Jeff from the UFC because, as you guys know, I work for the UFC, if you don't know, and I work in the athletes relations. So from the time the athletes get off of the plane, we pick them up at the airport, and then we take them to the hotel, and then, you know, that whole week we're with them, you know, through media all the way to weigh-ins, and then even the night of the fights, we're the ones that are coordinating the back, and we walk them out. Well, we don't walk them out anymore, but we used to walk them out. Anyway, so basically we are the eyes and ears, and we touch the fighters. We're the closest to the fighters throughout the whole week. So Jeff used to work with the Food and Drug Administration. Thank you, FDA. And UFC hired him on to look after their drug stuff.
Yeah, he also worked for the IRS, but he's doing the program for the health and safety and performance, I think it is, for fighters in the UFC.
Yeah, so what people probably think of Jeff is they think of him as the guy who takes down the fighters, but he's not. He's actually the one closest to the fighters to help them when they have been, USADA has come in and actually, flagged them for a banned substance. Well, they're going to go to Jeff and talk to Jeff about how to deal with it, or, you know, checking out the supplements that they may have used, or if they have questions about supplements or whatever, they'll go to Jeff and Donna. So I met Jeff last year. I met him, and we just, his daughter plays volleyball and I used to play volleyball, so we kind of met through there. But then in Auckland, New Zealand, we kind of sat down and had dinner together, and we just talked about everything that he's doing, talked about this FunkMMA, talked about, the Performance Institute, which is where he works now, the UFC Performance Institute in Vegas, which is an incredible facility. We gotta get out there, buddy.
Mm-hmm. We're 2018.
2018, we're definitely list. Going, yeah. So we thought it would be really important to have him on just to talk about his history, what he's done, just so you guys can actually check. Like, I love how he went into detail about, how he took down Balco and Lance Armstrong. And
he was open book for sure.
Definitely open book, man. This is one you don't want to miss, talking about just drugs and sports and what he does with the UFC and how it's evolving, and just for you younger fighters out there, not when I say younger fighters, I don't mean like 18, 16, 17-year-olds. I'm talking young in the sport. Just things that you need to watch out for and focus on as you're growing and as you're moving up into the in the sport.
Yeah, it was a good talk. We talked about the current state and where things are headed. So
yeah, it's definitely going to be awesome. So definitely check it out. A couple of things though before we get started. First, make sure that you download this podcast on the podcast app at the Apple Store. Go in the Apple Store, go to FunkMMA, download the podcast app. While you're there, download the Funk Roberts Fitness app as well. Also, guys, it's really important for us if you guys can go on and actually I just realized that something was open that shouldn't be open, but it would be amazing for us to go on and that window should be closed too. Yeah, can you close that window there, buddy? Thank you. Sorry, we're just having some difficulties. Yeah, so it would be...
Go on and give us a good rating,
yes,
because it's very important for us to have good ratings so this podcast can grow.
Leave your comments.
Yes, and we can continue to get some good guests as well.
Awesome guests, yeah. And go to funkmma.com. Make sure you download the 6 free programs. Go to nutrition4fighters.com. Download all of our nutrition programs. Both are free. They'll hook you up. And then finally, we've launched a new supplement company. Well, we launched it about 8 months ago, but we've been working very hard. Andy and I have been working very, very hard with the supplement and our team, and we're just about to launch our brand new line of supplements. We've got 3 big supplements coming down: protein, omegas, and MCT oil. So what we would love you to do so that you don't miss out on anything, we're going to have like awesome VIP codes for the launch, so you guys have special codes. Go to Lean. Where are they going? What social media?
Oh, sorry.
Social
You can
media.
follow us on Instagram at Revamp Nutrition Labs, and it's also Revamp Nutrition Labs on Facebook as well.
So like the page and follow us, because we're going to have some awesome stuff for you.
Yep.
All right. So without further ado, let's get into this awesome podcast with Jeff Novitzky.
Woo.
We are live. We are live. We are live, people. This is exciting. And first of all, you guys are going to want to sit down and not miss this, because we've got an awesome podcast today with my main man, Jeff Novitzky, who is now with the UFC, formerly with the Food and Drug Administration. Am I correct there, Jeff?
That's right.
Yes. And we're going to talk everything about drugs in sports, talk about performance. But first of all, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Jeff. How are you, buddy?
I'm great, Funk, man. Good talking to you, and thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely, Jeff. Why don't you start off with kind of giving us well, first of all, just so that for a background for everyone listening, Jeff and I met each other about a year ago at one of the UFC events. You work for the UFC right now. What do you do right now with the UFC exactly?
So my title is Vice President of Athlete Health and Performance, and that really entails, kind of as the title indicates, all aspects health and performance related with our athletes. Initially, I was brought to the UFC to put together our anti-doping program,
right,
and we got that off the ground and running in the first couple months, and that's kind of what my background comes from. But since then, I've kind of taken on, a lot of other areas with health and performance. Definitely paid a lot of attention to our weight management issues. Of course, throughout MMA, weight cutting is, a big part of the game right now, and we're trying to, make that less of the game, make it healthier, safer for fighters. So I oversee a lot of that. I work very closely with our medical team that licenses our fighters medically to fight, and then cares for them after the fight with any injuries they obtain during the fight or in training. And then I interface a lot with our new Performance Institute, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that here today. But a lot of times I'm the eyes and ears on the ground at events, because the Performance Institute's based here in Vegas, and basically able to identify fighters that the Performance Institute might do them some good, whether it be weight issues, whether it be strength and conditioning issues, whether it be rehabilitation issues. I'm, come back to Vegas and indicate to our staff, hey, I think you should reach out to this athlete or that athlete, and put the two of them together.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, and then we kind of sat down. I can't remember if it was New Zealand or Halifax.
I think it was. I think it was Auckland,
yeah.
right?
We had a good dinner, and we just, when I started talking to you to really dig down on what you're doing now, it was kind of like I had a different thought of what you did and what you are actually doing in regards to helping the athletes and the Performance Institute. And I was really blown away, because I love what you're doing now and how you're helping to grow the sport safely, and because, again, we're going to get into this, but in the past, you were bringing a lot of cheaters down, which was huge. And so, and that's kind of the stigma that I guess when you first started with the UFC, you carried. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So, a little bit of my background. I was a federal agent here in the United States for 22 plus years, and really the latter half of my career got involved in these investigations involving the distribution of athletic performance enhancing drugs, and really starting back in 2002 with an investigation that came to be known as the Balco investigation.
Right.
Involved Marion Jones, Barry Bonds, amongst others, 40 to 50s of some of the highest profile, professional athletes really in the world that were getting performance enhancing drugs from Balco. And then from there kind of went on to a lot of work in Major League Baseball and investigations there, and then ultimately finished up with the Lance Armstrong professional cycling investigation. And when I came over to the UFC and the UFC hired me, and this was definitely discussions I even had with the UFC, the perception would be that, okay, here comes, the drug cop. He's out here to get everybody. And really my positioning here requires me to gain the trust of the athletes. Right. If they don't trust me and don't trust me enough to pick the phone up and ask a question and go ahead and take something without asking, it could, their careers could be at stake. So really developing that trust was paramount early on in my career here with the UFC. And it didn't happen overnight, but, I think as I got out to a lot of these events and had that interaction with our athletes, that helped. And then, kind of the things we just talked about, taking on more than just, overseeing our anti-doping program, interfacing with our medical team to make sure these athletes got the medical care they needed, helping them manage their weight safer so that A, it was healthier, and B, they could perform better when they fight on usually Saturday nights. Right. So I think a combination of those things now, 2.5 years into my tenure here with the UFC, I think I'm starting to build up that trust, and, at least the interaction that I have with our athletes makes me feel that that's the case here.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, just in the news today, literally with Junior Dos Santos, in the article that I read, Junior was popped for from banned substances and is not fighting against on the Edmonton card. But even in the article I read, in the statement that they put, they were like, you and Donna, they were saying thank you so much to Jeff and Donna for helping us to, to put this through in order to figure out what, if it was a supplement or, helping us kind of figure out what's happening, which is amazing.
Yeah. You mentioned Donna's name, Donna Marcolini,
yes.
One of the 5 original employees here at the UFC. And just recently, within the last month, she came over to work with me. And, going back to the trust factor, she's developed relationships over her 15 years. And she initially was Dana's assistant,
right,
basically.
Yes.
Dana's, right-hand woman. And she knows everybody there is to know, in the UFC. So that a huge, asset to me and helping to further develop that trust with our athletes. But I can't, Junior's case obviously is, still ongoing. So I can't really talk to specifics about him, but my role, Donna's role as these potential violations come in is to get in touch with the athlete and their support team and basically, offer our assistance. And taking a step back, one of the reasons we can do that is the UFC does not administer our own anti-doping program. So unlike, the other professional sports leagues really around the world that are administering their own program and in a sense policing themselves, the UFC does not do that. We handed off the administration of our program to the United States Anti-Doping Agency. USADA, correct. And they basically make, all decision making, all results management is in their hands. They decide what UFC athletes are going to be tested, how many times they're tested throughout the year. When an athlete potentially tests positive, they're the ones that determine what the sanction is. So because of that, in Junior's case and other athletes, when we're notified by USADA of a potential violation, Don and I will get on the phone with them and basically offer our assistance. And what I tell all of them is, look, I'm here to believe you until you give me reason not to believe you. And if you tell me that you didn't do this on purpose, I'll help you work through the process to figure out how this substance, appeared in your system. And as long as, the facts, continue to show that you are telling us the truth, we'll continue to do that. And, in this day and age with supplements and contaminated supplement issue out there can be instances where, athletes didn't intentionally ingest a prohibited substance. Now, we do a lot of education for our athletes. And, at this point, 2 years in, there really shouldn't be an excuse of not doing your homework and using supplements that could potentially be dangerous. But nevertheless, this program is put into a place to catch intentional cheaters, not athletes that make a mistake or ingest something unknowingly.
Yeah, so you don't know when the athletes are going to get tested. Like you just find out after, right?
Correct. No idea. So,
you don't know.
I mean, our athletes, that's one of the, amazing things about this program is they're subject to testing 365 days a year, literally, Funk, 24 hours a day.
That's
they're
crazy.
routinely woken up at 5, 6 in the morning. I don't know of any instances where they've been woken up in the middle of the night or 2 or 3, but I'm sure if USADA had reasonable cause to believe that an athlete was, using a substance in the middle of the night, thinking it would be cleared from their system by the morning, they could potentially knock on their door in the middle of the night. But yeah, you're right. We don't know when that test is coming until after it's done. And, for good reason. The reason being is, hey, it wouldn't happen, but could Don and I have a favorite fighter and, know that,
Yes.
a USADA test is coming and put a call? I mean, that would never happen, but sometimes perception in the anti-doping game is just as important as reality. And if a fighter thought that hey, who's to say that Don and Jeff don't have favorites on the roster and are making calls, about when a test is coming? Well, there's no way an athlete could even perceive that because that's just not the way this program's put together. USADA does not tell us in advance when a test is coming.
Right. Wow. And so, yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I love what you're doing now, and just as the maturation of the sport and the evolution of the sport, where especially in UFC, I mean, other organizations have their own thing going on, but with the UFC, I think it's great that you guys are have put that in, and that they have an outlet now. Like they don't feel like they're on an island. They now have an outlet for help. If they truly didn't do it, like if they truly did not do it, if it's supplements, and I don't know how many times has supplements been the answer to or been the cause?
I don't have the exact number for you, but I think we've had 47 or 48 adverse, what we call them, events in the history of this program, 2 years and 3 or 4 months. And, again, without looking at the numbers, I'd say maybe, a third of them were due to dietary supplements, either contamination or purposeful spiking by the manufacturer, but not putting those substances on the label. So it's a real issue out there. It's a real dangerous issue out there. Wow. But, I think you and I might have talked about this in Auckland. You talk about the importance of this program in the UFC. And I say this all the time, that, look, I'm a firm believer in integrity of all sports. And my previous career, I did a lot. I think the investigations we did a lot to clean up Major League Baseball and obviously the Olympic movement and world records and the integrity of those. But when you're talking about MMA, you're talking about the UFC, you're talking about importance of a whole new level. This isn't just about, hitting a ball over a fence or setting records, riding a bike up over a mountain. As you guys know, these are the most skilled fighters on the planet Earth. And when you talk about, artificial enhancement, what these drugs could do to an already most skilled fighter on the planet, you get into a really dangerous scenario where the health and safety of these fighters are at risk. So it really takes on a whole new meaning, anti-doping does in MMA and the UFC. So really proud to be a part of it and see what we've done here with this promotion, with this program.
For sure. So let's backtrack now, because I want to talk about the baseball, and then of course Lance Armstrong and how you even got involved in that. For me, I used to be a big baseball nerd, because when I was in high school, which is like 85, 84, 85, 86, and a couple of years after that, I was part of like a rotisserie league baseball, which is actually now called fantasy league baseball. It's basically when rotisserie league or fantasy league was first invented, me and like 8 of us were a part of this rotisserie league. And so we were in baseball, so you draft your players and throughout the year, whatever. And I remember literally in like 2 or 3 year span, you get guys like Mark McGwire on your team, or Sammy Sosa or whatever on your team, and they give you some great stats, and then literally like 3 or 4 years later, there's guys crushing you because they've got McGwire and Sosa on the team, and they're jacking home runs and RBI. It's like, what the f? It kind of like happened overnight, like literally overnight. How did you get involved in that?
Yeah, it was a crazy era. So really back in 2002, a federal agent at the time, and actually it was kind of in the community that I lived, this business by the name of Balco Laboratories. And it was something that I was, kind of aware of on the fringe. They'd appear in local newspaper articles around every 4 years, usually Summer Olympics, talking about, some of the athletes that were going there for, they marketed themselves as a trace vitamin and mineral testing laboratory. So the idea is, as an athlete, you come in and have your blood tested and see what minerals or vitamins you were deficient in. But as I'd read these articles and saw kind of some of the athletes that were going there, and started to kind of hear rumors kind of within the community about what they were doing, began to kind of paint a picture that they were one of these, laboratories, which I had heard that were out there that were catering to, professional athletes by providing them, both banned and illegal performance enhancing drugs. So at that period in my career, I grew up playing sports, big fan of it. And I thought, man, this would be an awesome case to get involved in. I want to take a little bit deeper look and see what's there. And one of the first things I did is I had access to this database in the U.S. that tracks currency transactions. So this law was passed kind of after, drug distribution and money laundering of drug profits in the 1980s and 90s kind of skyrocketed. So the federal government here in the U.S. passed a law that any currency transaction, so cold hard cash in excess of $10,000 at a bank, there would be a report filed, and it would be put in this law enforcement database so that they could track and kind of put criminal organizations together by their financial transactions.
Who are you working for at this time?
So at this period of time, I was working with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division.
Okay.
So the IRS, large-scale tax evasion, but money laundering, so large-scale financial investigations involving the cleaning of illegal profits.
Okay.
And so my thought was, well, if what I'm hearing and the rumors are true about Balco, they're probably, either they're dealing in currency, either to buy the illegal drugs or they're selling the illegal drugs. So why don't I take a look at this database and see, what's going on there? And boom, as soon as I opened it up and did a query, I saw that there were unusually large currency transactions being conducted for what was marketed as a blood testing laboratory. Right. And really at this period of time, and it continues to this day, currency is an inconvenient thing to deal with right now. It's much easier for a credit card or a wire transfer or a check or whatever. So when you see a business like that dealing, and Balco happened to be dealing in hundreds of thousands of dollars in currency transactions a year, it just did not make sense.
Right.
And so that was kind of first step. And then the second step is I started examining the discarded garbage of Balco every week.
What?
So
you went
in
there?
the U.S. Yeah. So
oh my God. You're picking garbage. You're a garbage picker.
Every Monday night, the company would put their garbage out to the curb, and in the U.S. you lose what's called your reasonable expectation of privacy, or basically any rights to your garbage when you put it out to the curb. It's free for anybody to come by and take. And so I, for literally 1 year straight, would take my car and drive out to Balco, usually at midnight or 1 a.m, to make sure no one was around, take their garbage can, bring it to a big dumpster under a light in the parking lot, and go through it. And really from the first night I did that, I struck the jackpot. They were, discarding the wrappers of the performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, human growth hormone, EPO, which is a blood-boosting product, right, as well as correspondence with athletes. So I was seeing emails, notes, invoices, And really, I mean, that honeypot kind of, yeah, it was funny. They tear up, a few. They wouldn't put it through a shredder, but as I often do, or used to do, before you throw something away, you think, oh, if I tear it into pieces, totally. No one will be able to read it. Well, I mean, we all put puzzles together in kindergarten, and I routinely would bring these torn up pieces of paper back to the office, and it took me about a half hour to put it together. So, yeah, if you ever really want to get rid of something, you need like a cross-cut shredder that shreds it into nothing. Otherwise, very easy to put those things back together.
So while this was all going on, did you ever feel like anybody was onto you? Like, did you ever feel like you were being watched or anything like that? Because, like, I mean, if I was showing up at a business, like, for a year straight, just, like, grabbing the garbage, and I'd be looking over my shoulder, was there any situation where you thought somebody might be onto you?
There was. It's funny. It was near the tail end of my looking through the garbage. I don't know why I did it, but I switched up a dumpster that I went and examined the recently taken garbage from Balco at. And so I went there, put it away, and like the next week in the local paper, in the police blotter, there was a section that Balco had noticed someone was stealing was taking a look through their garbage, because the dumpster that I put the stuff I didn't want in, I guess the janitor from that facility went out and saw unusual garbage in there and looked through it. Right. And called Balco up and said, "Hey, why is your garbage over in our dumpster?" And Balco's like, "I don't know." So they actually contacted the police saying, "Hey, somebody's stealing our garbage and bringing it, across town."
That's crazy.
So yeah, it was kind of a close call and a lesson learned there from that one. Ultimately, I think Balco thought it might have been like a competitor in the athletic world that was doing it, and as witness when we conducted a search warrant. So we actually did a raid on Balco shortly thereafter, and they definitely weren't on to the fact that it was law enforcement, because every piece of evidence that they ever had was still in their facility. It wasn't like they got rid of everything.
Right. And is this Victor Conte?
It is, yeah.
It is, okay, right. Yes, that's incredible. So shortly after that, you raid the place, and then that just starts that whole hearing, is that when everything starts then? It
did. So, okay. In order to get a search warrant, you write an affidavit. So basically, you throw all the evidence in this document and give it to a judge, and the judge looks at it and says, yeah, it's likely there's going to be evidence there. So they give you the green light to do that. Ultimately, that search warrant became public. So the sports media was salivated over this because of the names that were in that.
Yes.
And really that's when it took off. So that was, 2004, early 2004. And my name got associated obviously with that investigation. And really from then thereafter in my career, because my name, it did. So and not only in the U.S., but really worldwide, I had calls weekly from police officers, agents, foreign agents that would come across other information on similar cases. And usually they'd say, and I've never worked one of these cases, who has? Right. Jumped on Google or whatever, and my name inevitably would come up. So I was privy to really everything that was going on in the world, performance-enhancing drug investigation-wise, for the last, 12, 13 years of my career.
And was that a lot? Was there a lot?
Oh, fuck. I mean, it was all around this country. It was all around the world. Italians,
Canadians,
Spain, the French, UK, Australia, you name it. I mean, you name a high-profile investigation out there. If I didn't work it myself, I had a consultation call with the agents that did, probably several of them. I was privy to really everything. It was amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. So names like, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, Canseco, like those guys are all part of that time period.
Yeah, they were. Bonds came first in Balco, and then Clemens kind of arose shortly after Balco. I got a tip from an FBI agent back on the East Coast in the United States saying, hey, we've got this guy that knows one of the biggest steroid distributors in Major League Baseball, and that turned out to be a guy by the name of Kirk Radomski, who was a clubhouse attendant for the New York Mets.
Right.
He had close to maybe over 100 Major League Baseball clients that he was distributing to.
Wow.
And
Where was he
we
getting
went
it from?
out. Yeah, it's interesting the way I've worked previous to working in kind of the performance enhancing drug cases. I worked a lot of traditional recreational, a lot of South American cartels, cocaine distribution, heroin.
Wow.
And those are kind of large scale, where you see large scale imports of drugs and distribution. And really performance enhancing drugs is a much different model. It's kind of piecemealed. So Kirk, who worked for the New York Mets, had various sources that he get it from. He traded with other guys in the gym. During that period of time, human growth hormone was big, and he would actually go outside of pharmacies in New York and buy off human growth hormone kits from AIDS patients that were getting it, on a monthly basis. So they get 2 or 3 kits and realize, hey, one is really all I need. So they walk right outside of the pharmacy and sell the 2 extra kits.
That's incredible. So
it was really piecemealed.
Yeah, it was all low level. It wasn't even like you're expecting some massive organization going on here, and it's just like, all right, maybe I can get over there and get it off this guy. Oh, there's Carl. Carl, why don't you hook me up with your
exactly. And
hormones
Radomski, he volume-wise was one of the bigger guys, and you're only talking about 100 customers. So, you do a heroin or a cocaine distribution deal, you're talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands of customers, right?
Yeah.
And in the performance-enhancing drug world, it's a much different model, a much lower scale, smaller scale.
Big amount of people using it, a large amount of people using,
Yeah. We were kind of concentrating, obviously, on the professional sports angle. It's interesting. There was a lot of accusations of Jeff's just trying to get famous off this or likes the spotlight. But really, I saw these cases as we were trained as federal agents. What they told me from day one on the job is, look, there's not enough federal agents in the United States to solve all the crime. You'd have to hire 1 million federal agents. That's never going to happen.
Right.
So what your job is to do is to find the highest profile cases you can that the media is going to cover, and what that'll do is it'll put a deterrent out there. So people at home will be reading the newspaper about this case and said, "Oh man, I'm selling these things too. Like, I better stop because the government's out there going after these people." So early on, I said, "Man, when you have these very high-profile clients of these potential targets in the investigation." The media is going to care about these cases. And when these cases get out in the media, that's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, creating a deterrent out there. And there's no better high-profile case to be working than these to do that trick. And it really turned out to be the case. And the sports media went crazy over these things. And I think it not only changed, professional sports, but it clearly got the word out there to those, partaking in this criminal activity that, hey, the government was looking at it and weren't afraid to investigate it. Yeah, exactly.
So then I guess the next biggest, highest profile is Lance Armstrong. Did you go after that? Were you put on that? How did that come about?
Yeah, it was interesting. So initially it didn't involve Armstrong, but it involved another professional cycling team, a domestic one here in the U.S. And ultimately that led to contact I had with Floyd Landis, who was a former teammate of Armstrong's, who won the tour in, I don't know if it was 05 or 06, and then shortly thereafter was stripped because he ended up testing positive on one of the legs.
Right.
So we contacted Floyd, worked very close with him for a period of time on this other case, and Floyd basically said, "Hey, I got information on something that's bigger than this." And so basically we said, "Hey, we're all ears." And
you rolled.
Yeah, that kind of led to the Armstrong investigation. Yep.
That's phenomenal. And how long did that whole case take?
Yeah, it went for a couple years, 2 to 3 years, and ultimately the criminal investigation that I was a part of was shut down. Never really did find what the reason was. We were instructed by the U.S. attorney in Los Angeles, who the case was kind of being worked out of, that he wanted to close the criminal case. However, the government took up a civil case. In fact, it's going to trial here in November finally.
Wow.
they charged him with violations of the False Claims Act. And under that law in the U.S., the government can go after 3 times the amount of the false claims. And they're contending the false claim was when the U.S. Postal Service paid Armstrong $36 million. Armstrong, they basically wanted assurances, hey, you're not using any drugs, there's no doping activity, you're not encouraging it. And he both gave verbal declarations to that and written declarations. And so now they believe that they can go back and not only recoup the 36, but 3 times that amount. So he's on the hook for over $100 million in this trial.
Insane. Yeah, that was huge. That was big. I mean, I remember that whole thing and him and Oprah, and it was crazy. And the fact that you were behind, or one of the people, behind that is incredible.
Yeah. There was times I was, going back to Balco, pinching myself, thinking, man, this is really, some historical stuff that you're involved in here. You're talking about, some of the most famous athletes on the planet, athletes that hold some of the most hallowed records on the planet, and being involved and knowing what's going on behind the scenes. I always felt really privileged to have, the ability to do that and be in that position.
Do you ever have interactions with these athletes after they get caught? I'm just curious, because if you talk to them afterwards, do they feel like guilty for it, or is it one of those things where you guys have no interaction after the case is done?
No, I've had a ton of interaction. In fact, I tell people I think that, that's the part of my background which helps me most in this job with the UFC. Is prior to coming here, I talked to, 150, 200 professional athletes that chose to use performance-enhancing drugs. And so getting into their heads about how they did it, why they did it, how they felt about doing it after doing it, I think benefits me a whole lot here in, sitting down and talking to the athletes here. And an interesting thing that a lot of people were surprised to hear me say is, I came away from a lot of those conversations with those athletes back in the day, understanding, not agreeing with, but in some cases understanding why they did it. I mean, you talk about a Major League Baseball player in the mid to late 90s who was, struggling to make the team to get one of these multi-million-dollar contracts, and they saw everybody around them in the clubhouse using stuff. Mm-hmm. They saw that there was no testing at all being done by Major League Baseball. So in their heads, it was like, well, I guess they're green lighting it. I like to think if I was put in that same situation that I would say, nah, that's all right. I just have, I have morals and ethics that are going to prevent me. But I don't know that I could say that if I was, in my early 20s, if I could have made, I would hope, but I'm not sure. So a lot of those instances I came away with understanding, like, wow, like I kind of get why you made that decision. It's somewhat understandable.
Which I think is very important right now that the UFC is doing what they're doing, because there's many organizations, coming up to the UFC where there isn't any testing, and there are a lot of people that are using, I don't know personally, but I know that there's a lot of people using, just because their goal is to get to the UFC, especially if that's their number one thing. But if they're going to fight someone who's they know is using something, or they want to have that edge, and again, as the more competitive you get, the higher you get in the level of fighting, the more level most of the fighters are. Again, not in the UFC level, but underneath. It's really important for the UFC to have these things in place, because then the fighters who are coming up know, okay, well, if I want to go to the next level, I got to stop doing this. I can't use, performance enhancing drugs. I can't if this is where I want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that again is why it's, so satisfying to be involved in this program here, that we're setting that bar so high to the pinnacle of the sport. Everybody obviously in MMA wants to get to the UFC, and now, a lot of these, local regional promotions don't have really strong, if any, anti-doping programs. But as you said, everyone who aspires to get to the top of the mountain knows, hey, when I get there, I can't use anything. So, hey, why would you want to start,
exactly.
When you're younger, heading out? Because that would be a very difficult thing. I know from just the science behind it. Once you get on these substances, you kind of need them.
Forever.
You know, it's
not
very,
forever,
yeah,
but
in some cases forever. A lot of these athletes, their you know, systems shut down natural production forever because they've been on these things so long. So what's ironic is you see some of these athletes as they get into their 40s, 50s, and 60s suddenly have a medical need now to get on these substances because their bodies aren't producing anything anymore. But yeah, you know, again, going back to the importance level of things, you know, here in MMA and the UFC at a whole new level, and talking about understanding why an athlete would choose to do something. Now, I couldn't understand anymore why an UFC athlete would choose, because they all know what type of program we have. They all know that the longer they're in this program, if they're using something, the likelihood of them getting caught is greater and greater. So I can't say that I understand now, but going back 5-10 years ago, could I understand? Maybe more so than any other sport. Not only, you know, if athletes thought their opponents were going to use or were using, it's almost like survival mode at that point in this sport, right? You want to walk out of that octagon and
alive.
I'm sure, and a lot of these athletes, I'm sure that was part of their decision making as, hey, you know, this isn't right to do. I feel bad, but for survival purposes, I need to do this.
Exactly.
So how do you guys stay ahead of people that are using? Because I would imagine that people that are using are possibly consulting with doctors or finding different methods to work around the testing. Now, do you guys have to keep reevaluating the way that people are being tested, or like, how do you know how that works? Or?
Yeah, all the time. That's a really good question. So it's a constant cat and mouse game, and I think it's safe to say that even today, as many advances as anti-doping has had, the dopers, at least the sophisticated ones, are still probably a little bit of a step ahead of the anti-doping movement. I think a big development since, you know, back when I first started in this world in, you know, the early 2000s is anti-doping has realized that testing alone is not enough. You know, you have to have testing. Solid, comprehensive testing needs to be a part of it, but it's not enough. So the approach now is really three-pronged. So number one is education. So you've got to get out and educate athletes on, A, how comprehensive the program is, so you set a deterrent on the front end.
Right.
B, on the health and safety aspects of using these substances, that they can be really, really bad for you, not just short term, but definitely long term. Then obviously the second is education, but the third, and maybe most importantly, when you're talking about trying to stay ahead of new trends or catch up with new trends, is there needs to be an investigative element to anti-doping. So what you see is the USADAs of the world and other reputable anti-doping organizations. They interface quite a bit with law enforcement agencies. Right. In fact, a lot of the cases I worked later on in my career were the result of tips that USADA would get and pass along to me, so that I can work them, you know, from an investigatory side. USADA actually has a couple investigators on staff that, you know, if a UFC athlete tests positive, they may send out that investigator to go talk to that athlete, figure out, hey, where are you getting this stuff from? Right. Try to put the picture together. If there's a new drug out there, develop a test for it, see if there's other athletes using it. So the investigative side to anti-doping is super, super important.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure. So let's move on to weight management, because one of the things that, you know, we're still seeing, I mean, I know on my end, you know, when I work with the UFC, we do the athlete relations, and of course, you know, on the Tuesday that they come in, we weigh them, and there's still fighters that are coming in 30 pounds over or 25 pounds. They still get a cut. It's crazy. I think still to this day, it's crazy, especially at this level that you know, I always say, guys, like, if you know you have a fight coming up, you're starting to cut from that time. You know, you're eating healthy so that by the time you get to the event on the Tuesday, you only have a few pounds to cut, 5 or 6, if that. Not just the fact that you're putting your body into such a drastic state of cutting, but your performance is going to be lackluster the next day with energy and trying to replenish everything. So, you know, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on what you guys are doing to help that?
Yeah, first off, you're on that 100% Funk, and you guys and athlete relations and what you do at events, you really see that, firsthand. And I don't know how much you talk about this on your podcast, but what Funk and others do, or they are kind of the eyes and ears on the ground and have the most interaction with our athletes during fight week.
Right.
As you said, they'll weigh them in, Tuesday when they get there, and literally all day long throughout the week, all week long, yeah. they're with them and see that progression that they're making toward their goal weight. And you're right, it's still an issue. Now, this was something unlike the anti-doping performance enhancing drug rule, where I had a ton of experience in. This was something that was completely foreign and new to me. And it really came on my plate early on, though, because part of our anti-doping program, which follows the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, prohibited substance lists and prohibited methods. The WADA list prohibits the use of IVs.
Right.
And what I found out early on, just from almost revolt from fighters, is, are you kidding me? IVs are going to be illegal? Do you realize how many fighters use IVs after weigh-in? And if you take away the IV, like, you're going to put somebody in
danger,
in serious jeopardy. And I said, well, why? And they said, do you know how much weight fighters are losing? Like, how bad they are dehydrating themselves, Thursday and Friday morning of weigh-in day. And so luckily USADA was, understanding and reasonable. We actually put a 3-month delay on the IV ban. So the program went into effect July 1st, 2015.
Yep.
Not until October 1st, 2015 did we institute the IV ban. The reason being is we wanted to give fighters who had an upcoming card, at least 3 months preparation of, hey, come in with a little bit more moderate amount of weight to use so that you wouldn't have to, rehydrate using an IV. It's interesting. We've taken a look at, and we've studied, and we continue to study all of those data points throughout fight week over the last 2.5 years. So now we have a data point. Tuesday would be check-in day.
Yeah.
As you know, Funk, you guys put them right on the scale then. Then obviously now Friday morning, they have their official weigh-in, so we have the weight there. And now we even take weight Saturday night. So the night of the event, we take a look at how much weight is put back on between the weigh-ins and fight night.
Right.
And while we've seen significant improvement on both ends, we've seen less weight being taken off fight week. We've seen less weight being put on between the weigh-in and fight night. It still is an issue. And
totally.
Funk, you can talk firsthand to this. There's no way of saying the problem is solved, and everybody comes in more moderately. It's getting better. Slowly, I think, but surely, but slowly is definitely the operative word there. And I think that we need to do more. And I think that's really, maybe leads us to the next topic of this podcast, but that's where our Performance Institute, I think, comes into play, because we've got some resources there that I've seen put into effect over these last couple of months, which I think have the potential of really being game changing.
Yeah, I think that before we get there, there's a couple of things. Number one, it's really important that the younger fighters are not, it starts with the younger fighters. Like, yes, we have the fighters in the UFC, but it's got that mindset of not drastically cutting weight the night before has to start with the 18-year-olds, the 17-year-olds, the guys who are on the local scenes, amateur, then the pro local scenes, and then even, some of the other organizations out there. Those guys are the ones that, need to start thinking more about, okay, I got a fight coming up, like I mentioned before. I'm starting to cut now. I'm starting to, my nutrition's clean, my conditioning. I'm not waiting 2 weeks or 3 weeks before to really hit my cardio. I'm actually implementing my cardio and conditioning to burn fat and to burn some of that weight off weeks before, so that, by the time they get to the weigh-ins or that week of, they're not cutting so much. Andy here, you've cut weight a few times, and I like the way you cut weight, because when you have a fight that's coming up, you're one of those guys who doesn't cut a lot during the week of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I also think it's easy because I'm young and I don't have all those weight cuts under my belt. For instance, more experienced guys at the gym just have a harder time getting the weight off no matter what they do. Whereas for me, I just need to eat a bit less and sweat more, and it just falls off. Whereas somebody does the exact same thing as me and they weigh exactly the same. So
It all depends.
Yeah, Andy, I see that all the time. My belief, now that I've been following this issue very closely the last 2.5 years, is that most athletes only have so many of those harder weight cuts in them. And I see it time and time again that, someone in their early 20s, it was easy for them, and it starts to catch up to you the more that you do. We both early on, we reached out to experts in the medical and scientific community, dehydration experts. We worked very closely with the U.S. military, who was studying dehydration in their soldiers. Right. And we thought, wow, that's the level of experts that we want to talk to about dehydration, because when it comes, to the military, they're trying to save these kids' lives. Right. And make sure that if they get dehydrated, how to properly rehydrate them or how to prevent dehydration so they could live on a battlefield. And we thought, man, those are the experts that we want to talk to. So, both in talking with them about how to do things properly, there's a couple things. There's the health consequences. And when you're talking about for all those young fighters out there, when you're talking about these severe cuts, these severe episodes of dehydration, you are going to suffer both short-term health consequences and long-term health consequences. And they've been well studied and well documented, and you are going to pay for doing those. So that's one side of things. And that's often the thing that's difficult to get to fighters, because as you guys know, these are some of, the MMA athlete, some of the toughest enduring athletes on the planet. Yeah. And when you start talking about things that could hurt them, like it goes in one ear and out totally. The other ear, yes. They're all bulletproof. But the other side of things, in my experience now, is when they start listening, and that is how that weight cut affects performance when you compete, 24 to 36 hours, after the weigh-in. And both, the experts that we've talked to, and now really anecdotally, now that I've had the time to kind of educate, and you see a lot of fighters either moving up a weight class mm-hmm. or changing the way that, that they lose those last couple pounds of water and they have more moderate cuts. Anecdotally, man, if I've had one conversation, I've had 3 or 4 dozen of fighters who have said, man, Jeff, I wish I would have been doing this, way earlier in my career. Mm-hmm. I felt so much better fight week. I had so much more energy to concentrate really on the fight plan versus my weight cut. And then come Saturday night when it was time to fight, I had all of the energy and all the endurance in the world. And so I love hearing stories like that, and I hear them all the time. But Funk, you're absolutely right. This problem is not over with, and we still have a lot of work to do.
What do you think about the new weight categories that they've implemented into MMA? Not the UFC, but do you think that's gonna help at all?
Yeah, I think it can, but it's not a problem that has just one solution. It needs to be multi-step solution, because I think if you just add more weight classes, my fear then is, hey, the next lowest weight class may be even more obtainable. Totally. Where before it was 15 pounds away, and hey, wait a second, you're adding another one? Shoot, I'm only 10 pounds away from going even lower now.
Right.
So that in and of itself isn't the solution, but I think that along with other steps is the solution. Now, we just had an event in Anaheim and California most recently passed what they called the 10-point plan. And at the top of the plan was something that I really like. And in California, the commission made calls to, I think they did the top 3 or 4 fights on the card, but they made calls 30 days out. They actually did Skype calls, video. And they basically told the fighters well in advance, hey, we're going to call you. We're going to Skype you 30 days out. We want to see what your weight is then. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to Skype you 10 days out, and we want to see what your weight is then. And really, that small step of making a fighter accountable 30 days out versus Funk when you weigh them on Tuesday 3 days out from weigh-in, I think makes a difference.
It plants the seed. It plants the seed right from the get-go. You know that you're gonna be Skyped. You know that's there. So it's like, okay, you know what? It's always in the back where you're gonna start to hopefully you're gonna start to focus more on the cutting during those 30 days.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been there, Funk. What do you do Tuesday? You have a guy or a girl step on the scale that has to lose still 14, 15% of your body weight. I certainly don't at that point tell them, hey man, you really messed up. You're going to have a hell of a week and your performance is probably going to be crappy Saturday. At that point, for the fighter's sake, you got to put the best face forward and go, okay, man, everything good? You feeling good? Everything all right? Yeah, man, I'm good. I've done this a lot of times.
Yeah.
That's not the time to tell them that, hey, you screwed up.
No.
You're making a call 30 days out.
Yeah.
That is the time to tell them, whoa, you're way heavy, man. You need to change something over the next couple of weeks here.
Totally.
I think that's beneficial. Another part of their plan is when the fight is announced, the commission requires the fighter to get a physical form signed by their doctor, the fighter's doctor. But on that form, the doctor says, I have discussed with the fighter that he's fighting at that weight class, at this weight class, and I feel it's safe for the fighter to obtain this weight.
I love it.
And, the hope there is, hey, the fighter can go to any doctor they want. They can go to a family doctor or a friendly doctor, but you would hope that doctor, knowing that, they're looking out for the health of their patient, would at least have the conversation with that fighter if the fighter's 30 or 40 pounds over what that fight weight's going to be, saying, all right, man, I'm going to sign off here that it's safe, but what's your plan here to lose these 30 or 40 pounds? And that's a good thing, having a discussion with, a medical physician 2 months out from a fight about how you're going to lose weight is a good thing. That absent this plan, I don't think a lot of those discussions were occurring.
For sure. I think it's great. So that brings us to the Performance Institute, because that's some of the things that I think are amazing. When you were telling me about the Performance Institute and all the things that were there, and I was just like, what? You guys got that? And what about this? And then I watched the video. But I think what you guys are doing there, I think this is going to be the future of MMA. I mean, sports in general, but MMA specifically, because, again, we're still in our infancy. And having a place like the Performance Institute can definitely increase the level of our professionals,
I agree. And to that line, when our fighters, the UFC fighters, come in and use the Performance Institute, now we have strength and conditioning coaches, physical therapists, we have a director of sports nutrition, director of sports sciences, but we don't have training partners. We don't have, MMA coaches. So the UFC athlete brings in their training partners, which may not be a UFC fighter, maybe, a regional local fighter. Right. They bring in their coaches, which are not just coaching UFC fighters for the most part, but are coaching, fighters throughout MMA.
Right.
So the idea is to disseminate this information throughout the entire sport of MMA, where the coaches and these non-UFC fighters come in and see the Performance Institute. They're taught how to train smarter, how to rehab smarter, how to, to follow proper nutritional standards. And the hope is they go back out to their gyms and this information gets disseminated throughout the sport, and not only does make the UFC greater, but makes, the entire sport of MMA greater, safer, and more efficient.
So how does the Institute work? Can somebody just show up and walk in, or is it an invite-only thing? And then what type of facility, like what's at the Institute?
So, the interesting thing is it's all schedule-based. So you can't, just show up. You need to plug in ahead of time with the Performance Institute staff. Really, it's open to any UFC fighter. They come use it for free as much as they want. But you need to have a time that you come in and hit the various aspects of it. So there's strength and conditioning is downstairs. There's a physical therapy aspect to it downstairs. There's nutrition consultation downstairs. And then really the upstairs has an octagon, wrestling mats, bags, and now a boxing ring, where the upstairs area is where you would go as an athlete with your team. So you'd bring your team in from the outside and go, upstairs and work out on your own. But it's all, it's all this very well choreographed dance there. There's many things that were well thought out in advance. If you had two opponents in an upcoming fight, well, we want to give them equal access to the Performance Institute, but you can't necessarily have them, training next to each other in an octagon or on the mat. So for that reason, it's all schedule based. So they figure out, usually the week ahead of time, who's going to be in town, who wants to use it, and they have very specific schedules when they're going to use, each portion of the PI.
And this is in Vegas, right?
It's in Las Vegas, correct.
I love the fact that it's free for the fighters. Like, I mean, the fact that they can literally have their entire camp there, because you have, like you said, you have nutritionists there, you have strength and conditioning. I mean, they can bring their own strength and conditioning, but I mean, you also have strength and conditioning coaches there, because it's not just like a gym. There's a ton of different machines, and like you've got the treadmill underwater, and you've got so many different, aspects of strength and conditioning alone that even if if myself went there, I'd have to educate myself and have someone help me understand why I'm using this, how I can use it, the best ways to use it, for my athletes or whomever,
Yeah, absolutely. It's got an altitude chamber.
Right.
You can mimic being on the top of Mount Everest, where you put an athlete on a treadmill or a bike on there, and a 15-minute workout in that, thin air could be the equivalent of, doing an hour at sea level. But yeah, one of the other real cool things is the Performance Institute is plugged into our kitchen or cafeteria. So basically the theory or the idea, and we've seen this now in action for the last couple of months, a fighter will come in and have a nutritional consult to start things off, and based on, kind of their weight management goals throughout training camp, our director of nutrition will basically put a plan together, a meal plan, every meal that the fighter is going to eat. And the fighter will start off in the morning, stay with strength and conditioning, and then walk next door to our kitchen, and their meal will be all prepared for them. Awesome. And free for them as well.
Awesome.
They can then come back over to the PI. We actually have a room, a rest and recovery room that actually has nap pods in it.
Nice.
So these high-tech, nap pods that you can kind of close the top off and take a little nap in the afternoon, and then in the later afternoon they can do their MMA training upstairs, and then go have their dinner ready for them at night based on what the nutrition is. So it's a comprehensive program that really, I think is going to take things to the next level.
For sure. I mean, you got Kevin Lee there pretty much living there, right?
Yeah, it's a huge advantage to our Las Vegas athletes, obviously. And, we've seen a couple. Francis Ngannou actually moved to Las Vegas just recently, and he is probably the most well-known face in the UFC headquarters right now. You see him here every single day.
That's amazing.
In the PI, in the cafe. It's a really cool thing, too, for our UFC employees that don't always get out on the road like you do, Funk, at events, and I do, is they'll come downstairs and, have their lunch in the cafeteria, and, Uriah Hall will be sitting down there, Kevin Lee, Francis Ngannou, and it gives them a chance to interact, with our athletes and really see, hey, here's why I'm working toward what I'm doing, our fighters.
I think it's great. Now, you don't have dorms there, but is that something you may implement at a later date, or is it just the institute?
Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility. There's some land around this that I've known about, some considerations in the future. We do have some contracts with some local hotels for some affordable housing.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that definitely could be something that's on the horizon that, would be all inclusive here, including, some type of dormitory residences potentially down the line.
And I love the fact you have the therapy there too. That's huge. The recovery part is just, you have all you have the four major things that athletes need. You've got the actual training, the skill training, the technique training, the sport training. You've got the strength and conditioning. You have nutrition, and of course the recovery. You got cryo there? Do you guys have cryo there?
We do. We have cryo. We have low-level laser light therapy. So I got to give a ton of credit. Really all the credit for the PI goes to James Kimball, who's our vice president of performance, and then a name that all your listeners probably know, Forrest Griffin.
Yes.
Forrest is one of the hardest working guys here in the UFC, is here at the campus every day. He and James literally traveled the world, and they went to every team and organization's training center that you can imagine, and looked at every one and identified the best pieces of each one and brought them all together here at the Performance Institute. So the success we're having with this and really how beautiful this place is literally all attributed to James and Forrest Griffin.
I was going to ask that. I was going to ask who came up with this and how they got all this information, but that's incredible. So this wasn't like, do any other sports have an institute, a performance institute like this?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few. I mean, I've been to a few in the NFL. I think the one that this most closely was modeled after was the Manchester City soccer team, or football as it's known in Europe. I think that talking to James and Forrest, our institute probably most closely resembles the one at Manchester City.
But that's just for their players, right? There's nothing like for sport specific.
True. Yeah. I think that's the difference here is because, so many training partners and coaches are coming in with our athletes. I think the dissemination of what they're learning at the Performance Institute here at the UFC is much greater than other facilities because they're all bringing it back out to their local gyms.
Do you think we'll be seeing any more performance institutes, maybe in more high traffic MMA areas, maybe LA or something like that?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I don't know what the plans are there. I know definitely there's a lot more room over at our Performance Institute with the idea that, again, attributable to James and Forrest, that, hey, look, as new technology, new training, rehabilitation, recovery technology comes online, we want to have the space here that we can put it in. So I think the Las Vegas one here is just going to do nothing but grow over the next several years with even more kind of bells and whistles.
Yeah, because I guess the goal, like if you were to look at what the goal would be, and I'm just, saying this is me talking, is that you would pretty much want most of the people who have fights coming up doing their fight camp there because there's everything there to assure their success. I mean, of course, maybe not the fact that they could roll with a whole bunch of people at their own gym. They won't have that, but maybe even doing a partial part of their, their final weeks, at least they know like the last 4 weeks I'm going to go to the Institute and by that time they can fight. They know how to fight. The only thing they're really doing is just, strategy stuff, cardio conditioning, their strength and conditioning, their nutrition. So having like the last 4 weeks, a ton of fighters there, which would mean having a ton of fighters all the time.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely what the idea is now. As our business model is unique. Our fighters aren't employees. They're independent contractors. Therefore, hey, we can't tell them where they're going to train or how they're going to train. But the hope here was to make this facility so world-class that once they are either exposed to it on person or start, reading or hearing about others that are using it, they think, hey, this is the place I got to be because this place is going to make me the best fighter that I can be, and it's going to ensure that I get to the octagon, that I don't get injured, or if I do, I can, rehab quickly from those injuries. And I think it's great that, I don't know if you followed Conor McGregor and his preparation for Mayweather, but, he moved out to Las Vegas, a month and a half, 2 months ago, had his own kind of warehouse facility with a boxing ring, built. The idea was to train there. Well, he got into the Performance Institute and saw it one or two times. And, to my understanding, he's almost exclusively used the Performance Institute for his preparation because he just saw how world-class it was. So,
that's incredible.
Man, that's about as good an advertisement, I think, as you can have for it. That someone, of his caliber and leading up to this, important of a fight sees the benefit in using this place.
100%. So he's there like twice a day, you're saying, right? Pretty much?
Yeah. He was doing 2 a days until I think he just recently this week tapered off to once a day, but was doing two a days here. Yep.
That's right there. That just tells you, Conor's always, top notch in regards to facilities and trying to get an edge and innovation, and knowing that this is where he's doing his camp for the Mayweather fight is incredible. Just like you said, it's a testament to what you guys are doing. You're getting a lot of other positive feedback as well from the fighters and coaches. Yeah, definitely. We just, we have a reality show, our reality show, The Ultimate Fighter, that's taped here in Las Vegas, and we just recently completed the taping of this season. Hasn't started airing yet, but this season is basically our new women's division. So the women's 125-pound division. And the PI, very convenient because the Tough show is filmed here locally. So the PI staff was able to get to the Tough house and basically educate the fighters. And they had a few real success stories throughout the taping of that show of fighters who, in some cases, and if you're on that show, you may have to fight 3 times in a 5 or 6 week period. Right.
And if you're doing weight cuts, 3 times over 6 weeks, that's a lot, even if you're cutting moderate amounts of weight. So there was, hopefully it comes across on when the series airs, and a lot of the storyline shows the success of the PI, but there were a few instances that the PI was very successful in this most recent taping.
That's amazing, man. I got to make my way out to the PI, man. Me, Andy, and my wife, we got to get out there just to check it out and spend a couple days there and hang out. And yeah, we're definitely probably the new year, but it's definitely something that we want to do.
Definitely. We've talked about it. And I think once the Connor show kind of calms down after next week, it's going to be a lot easier to accommodate everyone else.
Awesome, man. Well, Jeff, thank you so much, brother, for being on the show. You got something? Yeah, it's been amazing, man. I love the information. If you could leave one little thought to some of the younger fighters out there in regards to, how they're coming up and what they should be looking for, and some of the, just some wisdom for younger fighters, because a lot of young fighters here that aspire to be in the UFC or just aspire to have a successful professional career in MMA.
Yeah, the one thing I tell everybody is I've been over my career exposed to athletes in literally every sport imaginable, and it really, is a special athlete that gets to, the level of professional athlete. But man, the MMA athlete on a whole new level. So I mean, if nothing else, just the respect that I have for people in this game is off the charts. I wasn't, I was a fringe fan before I came over here, but after having been here for 2.5 years now, if I was offered tickets to 50-yard line on the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals or World Series or a big MMA fight, I take the big MMA fight 100% of the time. Awesome. And, just seeing professional athletes and what they have to deal with, pressures, of competing on TV before millions, before tens of thousands in person. And the UFC athlete does that, but they're also getting in to the octagon with, again, we talked about earlier, one of the most skilled fighters on the planet Earth. And to see how they deal with the mental game is incredible. And I think that's what sets apart our champions from those that aren't. I mean, everybody in the UFC can fight. Everybody's skilled. Everybody's had 10, 15, sometimes 20 years experience. But the mental game is what sets our champions apart. The confidence that they have, the way they train, the professionalism. Unless you have all that, you're not going to rise to a champion level. The mental game, in my experience, is just as important as the physical, because everybody's got the physical game in the UFC.
I couldn't agree 1,000,000% more. Being a pro athlete in the past, you get to the point where it's all mental, man. Like there's kids who are out there that were more athletic than I was, could jump higher as a volleyball player, but mentally, I knew when they would break. That was the one thing that I had. So yeah, it is 100% mental, and I agree. Thanks, brother, for being on the podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
You got it, guys. Had a lot of fun. Great talking to you. Thank you for inviting me.
Take care,
we'll see you on the road, Funk.
Yeah, I'll see you in Edmonton, brother.
All right, my man. Bye.
You've been listening to the Funk MMA Strength and Conditioning Podcast, hosted by Funk Roberts, certified MMA conditioning coach, master of metabolic training, and fitness expert, bringing you insights on conditioning for all levels of fighters worldwide. Be sure to join us for another podcast.